We're now going to hear from Lorraine Nowlin. She's part of WDI Black Women's Caucus and is going to discuss the motivations, process and the response to the Black Women's Caucus statement against gender identity ideology and a little bit about Black Women's Caucus. So thank you so much, Lorraine, and over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, women. I am Lorraine Nowlin, the coordinator of Women's Declaration International USA's Black Women's Caucus. Myself, Dana, who was once a guest on Feminist Question Time, and Kristen decided that enough was enough. We were tired of proponents of gender identity ideology, many of whom are white privileged men, distorting the experience of Black women in America for their own selfish gain. A quote from our statement: gender ideologues employ the forced teaming tactic against Black women in order to shame us into being work mules for their campaign of male sexual privileges that they call transgender rights. While these efforts are masked as progressive and inclusive concepts, gender identity ideology is actually intrusive and harmful to women, and uniquely so to Black women. We were frustrated that this men's right movement would dare try to make Black women the face of invading women's boundaries, and that means invading our own boundaries. While, as you can see from these images, while there are Black women that support this movement and foolishly put their safety at risk to support it, I can't help but wonder how being constantly bombarded with this kind of imagery impacts Black women who are on the right side of history. And when I say the right side of history, I mean those that reject this dangerous ideology. We've got forced teaming from the left and the perpetuation of these images of Black women by the right. There are plenty of violent white men who claim to be women that harm women in our movement and threaten to harm women in our movement. But these images, especially the second image, are widely shared. That is not to downplay the foolish acts of these women, which includes taking part in disrupting another woman's right to free speech. It is simply to show one reason why we had to release a statement. Not only that, it is no secret to Black America, and probably now to white America, that there is very little outrage when Black women are victims of violence, whether by the men in our own communities or outside of it. So knowing that, we have to really count the costs. Is it really worth risking the wrath of law enforcement so that men can have access to women's vulnerable spaces? That may not be these women's intentions, but that's exactly what they're doing. If we must take risks, we should do it for ourselves, for causes that will actually improve our lives. I once heard a Black woman say that she's determined to protect trans women. I'm going to be brutally honest and say that every statistic on file shows that Black women can barely protect themselves, whether it's maternal mortality, police brutality, adverse health outcomes, sex trafficking. We need protection. We need saving. It is laughable and tragic to think that we can save others. Again, I'm mentioning all of this to illustrate the frustrations that led to our statement. Also, you know that our movement is branded as Nazis, racist, right-wingers, and every asinine rant the opponents could muster up while being willfully obtuse to the fact that some of us are Black, Asian, Jewish, and Latina. So Dana, Christian, and I met on Friday evenings via Zoom and worked hard on our statement. Our purpose was simply to write from the heart about why we feel this movement is harmful to us uniquely. We expected that some would read it, but we never imagined it would get the massive amount of attention it did. Well, I was especially shocked to discover that J.K. Rowling not only read it, but retweeted our statement. I know I will never get the opportunity to tell you this in person, J.K. Rowling, but thank you for sharing our statement with your followers. But of course, our statement hurt a few feelings. Some of the responses left me in stitches. There were actually people who thought that the WDI USA Board of Directors, of which I'm a member, were pretending to be a Black Women's Caucus. We were these imaginary Black women created via the imagination of white feminists so that people won't call us Nazis. Yes, some actually tweeted that. Then there were the few tragic but not so unexpected responses from Black women, just a few though. To them, our statement was mean, bigoted, and hurtful. In other words, some Black women feel that advocating for Black women solely or at all is hateful and wrong. Think about that. What they are essentially saying is that either we put on our capes for men or we perish. A couple of women accused us of focusing on gender ideology instead of, quote, real issues like police violence or the experiences of Black women in medical care, etc. While I do agree that those are important issues, I find it interesting that I've never heard those complaining about us tell those pushing gender identity ideology that Black maternal health is more important than their pronouns. They don't say that closing the educational racial achievement gap is more important than living out your AGP fetish, or that fairness in policing is more important than a man wanting to use the women's bathroom. It is only a problem when women prioritize themselves over everyone else. Until they have those conversations, you really can't have a conversation with us. So they really don't have a leg to stand on. But now with the middle picture, in case some of my international sisters are unaware, the phrase "we said what we said" or "I said what I said" is a popular phrase mostly among Black Americans, meaning get over it, or I stand by what I said, something like doubling down on a statement. But back to the point, however, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Women and men of all races let the Black Women's Caucus know that our statement was so needed and appreciated. I cannot tell you how many times a Black woman posted or tweeted, "Finally, finally." You might be wondering why a Black Women's Caucus is needed. Well, racism is a reality for Black women in the United States and throughout the world. It may manifest itself differently depending on where we live or what country we live in, but it's a reality nonetheless. Sometimes racism is intertwined with sexism, impacting Black women specifically. A Black organization might have a women's caucus in the same manner that an all-women's organization might have a Black women's caucus. The issue is this: some of our concerns will not apply to the broader women's movement, but at the same time, we are not going to ignore our specific issues because others don't want to acknowledge racism or are uncomfortable talking about it. It is imperative that we win this battle. We are not going to win with just one strategy. Has any war ever been won with a singular strategy or method? If a Black Women's Caucus statement will help win some battles, we will keep fighting. If a middle-class white woman will make gains in another area, definitely keep going. A Black woman might be able to make a statement that might cause a white woman to be called a racist. That's true. Others might listen to a white woman, but dismiss a Black woman saying the same thing. In other words, we are all branches of a tree called woman. Let's not waste time on why a caucus exists and instead just fight to win. Gender identity ideology erases the unique experiences of women and reinforces the harmful stereotypes of femininity and masculinity. It is also incompatible with the fight for women's rights because it allows men access to spaces and activities designated for women, such as bathrooms, sports teams, and housing. It has been reported that 1 in 4 Black girls are sexually assaulted before the age of 18, 1 in 4. 35% of Black women report experiencing physical sexual violence. Policies that allow men unfettered access to female-designated facilities puts Black women and girls, a demographic disproportionately impacted by male violence, at an even higher risk. Black women are 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by men than white women. And this is why the fight against gender ideology is pertinent for Black women. We are the demographic most in need of protection from male violence. There's a saying within Southern Black culture, when white people get a cold, Black people get pneumonia. What that means is that every threat or problem facing the country, Black America gets it worse. Make no mistake, male hatred and violence impacts all women, women of all races, but due to the position of Black women, we're facing more brutality. That is not an oppression Olympics. It is a painful reality. I wish that all women were equally and completely safe and free. Black women have spent decades undoing the trauma of colorism, hair texturism, and featureism. We can't then turn around and embrace a movement that encourages self-hate and perpetuates the same standards of femininity that were often used against Black women and girls. No matter the reason a woman or a man wants to live as the opposite sex, it is not possible for the belief that we can be born in the wrong body to coexist with accepting our dark skin, hair texture, and facial features. They contradict each other and can't be reconciled. We live in a world where skin lightening is a more than $8 billion industry. That annual revenue is expected to increase. I even saw one that said it'll be $27 billion by 2030. And what I'm saying is the powers that be are getting richer and richer off of you hating yourself, whether it's hating your body, feeling you're born in the wrong body, or the skin you're in. This was the first, but won't be the last time you hear from WDI USA Black Women's Caucus. Gender identity ideology is not about civil rights or self-acceptance. At its core, it is self-rejection, and it will do nothing but confuse and hinder civil rights for everybody. Thank you for having me.